whoever wins this race is going to be pretty much immediately thrust back into a re-election campaign.
Hi there, it's WAMC News Director Ian Pickus. And on this episode of the WAMC News Podcast, a special election on Long Island. Democrats are hoping to make a tight Republican majority in the House of Representatives even tighter via a special election on Long Island on February 13th. The seat opened up when fabulist Republican George Santos was expelled from Congress and features a well-known public figure for decades against a relative newcomer. The results will be closely watched in an area that has trended away from Democrats in recent elections, and for what they could tell us about the looming November campaign. And joining me now for a preview is Desiree Diorio of WSHU. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Ian. Thanks for having me.
So let's begin with a breakdown of who the candidates are.
Yeah, Tom Sasi has a lot of name recognition down here. He's the Democratic candidate. He already represented this district for 6 years. And before that, he was with the Nassau County Executive's Office and a county legislator and a mayor. He's got a pretty long federal voting record, and he's got a reputation for being a moderate Democrat. He routinely goes against his party on certain issues like taxes and border security. And now with this special election where he's trying to get back into his old seat, he is making some efforts to distance himself from the left wing of his party, which is what his opponent, newcomer Mazi Pillup, is trying to paint him as. She's brand new here. She is serving as a Nassau County legislator currently. She's in her second term right now. She was born in Ethiopia, emigrated to Israel, and then emigrated to the US. And she and her husband are now raising their family out here in the suburbs. Interestingly, she is a registered Democrat since 2012, but she ran for the legislature as a Republican and she won. She's doesn't have a whole lot of media under her belt, so it's hard to really get a sense of how she would act in a Republican Congress. But it's a very closely watched election. This is a swing district.
We know that former Congressman Sasi made amends with Governor Hochul during a visit to Albany after having run against her in the Democratic primary. So what are the key issues in this race? I mean, you mentioned the fact that we've got the parties each playing a role in terms of national debates being localized, but what are the two candidates talking about out there on the stump?
Yeah, two big things in this district that you need to understand. And just to orient your audience, we're talking about the Nassau County suburbs of New York City and a little portion of Queens. This is a very wealthy area. It also has a large Jewish population. Support for Israel is a big issue in this district. Also, tax relief. This is one of the most heavily taxed areas in the country. So while Sasi was in Congress, he was working hard to try and repeal the SALT cap. And Pillup says that she will do the same. So tax relief is a big issue here. Support for Israel, border security is another big issue here. This is particularly relevant because New York City Mayor Eric Adams is dealing with an influx of immigrants from the southern border, and a lot of areas on Long Island and in the boroughs of the city have been on high alert for incoming migrant workers that are going to be using other resources in those areas. So border security is a big issue. Israel and taxes are big issues here.
And I'll just say SALT is the state and local tax deduction. So Sasi, as you say, is a known quantity, and we know that he's been in Congress before. What's he saying about why he wants to go back? I mean, how did he get into the race for this seat this time?
Yeah, he's a political animal for many years. He established himself within the Democratic Party downstate. The failed bid for governor left him with a avenue to get back to his old seat, and he jumped on it.
For people who might not remember, when George Santos won this seat, there was really only nominal Democratic opposition to Santos. He got an easy win that year, and it was part of kind of a larger Republican takeover. Does that tell us anything about how this special election might go now that we've got a higher profile Democrat in there?
Yeah, it's a great point. Um, like I said, it is a swing district. Swazi was in there for 6 years. Before him, there was a Democrat, but before him, there was longtime Republican Congressman Peter King, who held that seat for, decades. So this race is being very closely watched. In the election we just had here in November 2023, um, even though you didn't see it in the rest of the country necessarily, there was a red wave throughout Long Island in terms of local seats. So this race is being watched very closely to see if this is really Swazi's race to lose.
Do we know and have the candidates said if they will go on and then seek a full term in the seat if either of them were to win? Because whoever wins is immediately thrust into the 2024 battle, presumably.
Yeah, that's the assumption that for Swazi for sure it would be happy to have his seat back after the special election. But yeah, that's the assumption is that whoever wins this race is going to be pretty much immediately thrust back into a re-election campaign. If Swazi gets back in, that means that the Republican majority in the House shrinks, but Democrats aren't necessarily that popular here. Long Island as a whole just saw that red wave come through in November.
And say more about the president's polling vis a vis the former president's polling. Is it fair to say that voters on Long Island perhaps might like Swazi more than they like Joe Biden right now?
That's certainly a possibility. The This district voted for Democratic presidents every election since Obama's first run in '08. But like I said before, the congressional representative there has flipped back and forth. Um, it's hard to know how the turnout is really going to turn out, for lack of a better word. Special elections obviously don't always get the same kind of oomph that general elections do. But at this point in time, Democrats have spent more money on television advertising than the GOP. But the GOP is doing a lot more old school knocking on doors, that sort of thing. So it's really going to come down to turnout, I think, and who's going to come out and vote.
Is there any sort of Santos hangover playing out in this race where is anyone locally in the local committees and local politics kind of taking any blame for Santos's short term in Congress and all of that associated drama?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, not No one's really willing to shoulder the blame for that debacle on its own. I will say I was out and about in the district on the day that Santos was expelled, and I was flipping through my notes before this to refresh my memory on what I was hearing from voters. Pretty much across the board, um, people who knew what was going on, who were familiar with the Santos saga, said pretty much across the board that of course he needs to go, and and this is not just a Republican problem. There's a lot of corruption in Congress. So what Congress did to Santos, Congress should also do to other members of Congress who people feel are in the same sort of corruption boat as George Santos was. Um, i- Talking to voters on that day, I got the sense that people didn't feel that the candidates as a whole spent enough time with them in the district courting their votes. So they were ending up with a situation where they didn't know Santos that great to begin with, even though he had done plenty of media before that election.
We've been speaking with reporter Desiree Diorio of WSHU. I'll wish you good luck on this rare February election night. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us.
Thanks, Ian. Happy to be here.
Okay, that does it for this episode of the WAMC News Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, I'm Ian Pickus.